Hey everyone, I'm back, and today we're going to be talking about The Wolverine. And this movie is directed by James Mangold, and it came out in 2013, starring Hugh Jackman once again, reprising his role as Wolverine. And I haven't seen this movie in quite a while. I saw it once on TV. I never saw it in theaters because I don't even know why. I think I was just watching some other movies that were out at the time. I forget why I missed it while it was in theaters like 10 years ago. Literally 10 years ago. Almost exactly 10 years ago. Wow. 10 years in 1 month. A lot has changed. And I just saw this movie at Walmart for like $7.50. I was like, do I really want this? I mean, that's a reasonable price, but I don't know how far I am for just getting a movie that I don't even know if I'm going to like it or not. Because I couldn't imagine it would be worse than X-Men Origins Wolverine, but it's definitely not as good as Logan, from what I remember. And I was like, no, I'll give it a chance, revisiting it after so many years, and now knowing what came before and what came after, and just all of that combined. And it was kind of interesting watching this movie from that perspective. And in some ways, I think it helped. In other ways, it kind of made it a little bit worse. But we'll get into those things. And overall, I enjoyed the movie. And as usual, I'm just going to get this out of the way. Hugh Jackman, he's great as Wolverine. And he is the character to me. And I can't imagine anyone else taking on this role. And I like what they do with his character in this movie. They don't just make him like a boring guy who's like, oh, he dealt with some things, but like when you put him in some action scenes, like he's not very interesting to watch. And in this movie, they do make him interesting, and they do give him something. And like, I'm curious as to where we go with this character. And my favorite part of the movie would be the first half of the movie, because I really enjoyed the tone of the film, and it was kind of somber and dark, and I was enjoying where it was going. Although there was a little bit of cheese with some dream sequences, I was fine with it because at least it served a purpose. With like Jean Grey and Wolverine having to deal with that, and apparently he hasn't like done anything in like 7 years or something, because he swore he would never kill anyone again or like fight or something. I don't remember the exact line, but basically he's retired and he's just living out in the middle of nowhere. And I liked where the story went, even if it is very familiar. There wasn't really anything particular about the story that I hated, and I like it more in concept a bit more than in execution. In execution, there were some things to be desired, and the action sequences, I enjoyed it. There weren't too many cuts, so you could see what was going on clearly. And for a PG-13 superhero movie, at least, there was a decent amount of blood in this movie, mostly in the first half, and I really enjoyed that element because it made it feel real. And I was like, there's consequences here, and Wolverine, he's like getting the crap beat out of him, and it's actually entertaining to watch. And I liked some of the other characters in the film, and they're basically just there to help Wolverine on his journey and to see where he goes. And his journey in the film was interesting to me because, like I said earlier, he can be a very boring character to watch if he's on his own. And in X-Men Origins, that's one of the things that hurts that movie, is what I meant to say. Sorry, not bogged down it. That's something that hurts X-Men Origins Wolverine, where he's just going after one guy and like he can't be stopped because he's like invincible. But in this movie, they changed it up, and instead of like going after someone necessarily, they kind of have that, but also he's protecting someone, and although he might not be able to die necessarily, the person he's protecting can get killed, and that's what makes these action scenes work. And also in this movie, without spoiling anything, I think they said in the trailer that Wolverine is not healing anymore, and that was something that helped out these action sequences because it makes the character feel vulnerable, and there's a lot of things going on in this movie that I enjoyed, mostly conceptually, but like in execution, like I said, I wish it was done a bit better, and it's not a movie that left me thinking, and that's always fine. Like, not every movie has to. It's just that where this movie kind of falls apart for me is the villain and the third act of the movie. I just felt it turned into a completely different movie. Because aside from that third act, the second half of the movie, it does stay, for the most part, consistent with the overall tone. Kind of serious with a bit of cheese every now and again, and the characters are fun to watch, and I do feel as though some of them were a bit underdeveloped, but I'm not angry with what we got by the end of it, and mostly the hook of the movie is just the action scenes and Wolverine's journey and the story and where it goes and things like that, and like having everything be very well executed and all that kind of stuff. And also I kind of wanted to bring this up. Stanley, rest in peace, he did not have a cameo in this movie, surprisingly, because once the movie was over I was like, did he have a cameo? Because I don't remember seeing him, and I looked it up, and apparently he was unable to show up because they were filming this movie in Australia, I believe. I could be wrong about that. And basically he was just unable to show up because he was busy with something else. I don't remember what. And I'm not trying to say like this is a bad movie because Stanley didn't have a cameo in it. I'm just saying that it was kind of interesting that this is a Marvel movie that he didn't have a cameo in, which is a little sad for me. But continuing on with a couple positives I still have. I enjoyed the comedic moments. There were some moments of cheese, like I said already, and they did feel intentional. Not all of them, but it was kind of fun to watch. There were moments where I was like, yeah, that's kind of funny. And I wasn't like upset at any point while watching the movie up until like the third act. And there were some conveniences throughout the film, and like I said, the villain doesn't really work. And the way they handled the villain without spoiling anything, I thought was underwhelming. Like, they could have done a much better job with it, and it was just like, really? And of course, this movie is also one of those films where, like, characters think out loud, like, the most obvious things ever. Like, Samurai Sword. Like, earlier in the film, they say, like, for a samurai sword, they require 2 hands, and that gets reincorporated into the film later, and Wolverine literally says that out loud towards the end of the film, and I was like, really? And also, this might sound like I may be getting into spoiler territory. Don't worry, I won't. This movie does have a mid-credit scene, and basically, without spoiling anything, it's setting up X-Men Days of Future Past, which is the next movie. And there are some things that just like don't make any sense to me. And also, what with this movie was setting up as a standalone film, and what that mid-credit scene was setting up, the setup so that this movie independently was making, like, minus that mid-credit scene, like, this movie did feel like it was setting up a few things, but 10 years later, they haven't done anything with those things, as far as I know. And it just felt kind of pointless now, like, in retrospect. And that's one of the things that makes this movie a bit worse, like, looking back on it, is that, like, yeah, some things you were setting up are, like, never brought up again, and it just feels like a waste of time. Not that it, like, takes up a huge portion of the film. Sadly, they just don't bring those things back in any other X-Men movie. And also, this movie is kind of relying on the fact that you have, at the very least, seen X-Men The Last Stand, or at least the first three X-Men movies, minus X-Men Origins Wolverine. Like, those three, it's really counting on you to have seen those, because this is a sequel to X-Men The Last Stand, and that comes into play with this movie. And if you haven't seen that movie, I don't know if that's going to make the experience of watching this movie as a standalone film better or worse, because there are some dream sequences in this movie, and they're referencing The Last Stand and like what happened at the end of that movie. It mostly works as a standalone film, but in some ways I think it might work just a tad bit extra if you have seen The Last Stand, even if that is a bad movie and I don't recommend it at all. But despite my criticisms, I do think this is a good movie overall. And going back to the violence in the film, like I said earlier, there was a lot of blood for a PG-13 superhero movie. Like, not like a gory film. I wouldn't call this movie gory, but there was a decent amount of blood for a PG-13 superhero movie. And that's mostly just in the first half of the film. And once you get into the second half, there's basically like no blood anywhere. And it's like, oh, it's like there's almost no consequences anymore. And that's something that drags this movie down a bit for me. I'm not saying that this movie would have been better or worse necessarily if it was rated R, so you could have like more freedom to do whatever type of violence you want. I'm just saying that because that it's all in the first half of the movie and not the second half, it does affect the tone a little bit. And because of that, it kind of feels like you're watching a bit of a different movie, and not like the previous X-Men movies had a lot of blood in them. In fact, I can't really remember much blood in the first three X-Men movies really at all. It's just basically, it's there, but it's kind of sprinkled in and just spread out. Whereas this movie, like, people are literally getting like stabbed and like going through their bodies, and there's like nothing coming out on the other end, and no blood, nothing, no, not even a squirt or a drop of blood anywhere. Who knows, maybe the MPA is like, this is enough violence. Like, with what we got by the end of it is what like the MPAA approved, and it's just like, this is enough blood. If you have just like one more drop of blood, then it's a rated R film. It's like, if that were the case, then I can see that happening, honestly. And to me, that is kind of funny. But anyways, I do think this is a good movie overall. I think it works a tad bit better with seeing X-Men The Last Stand, even if I don't recommend watching that movie. But as a standalone film, I think it's good, it's watchable, and I could see myself revisiting this movie again. And I'm not upset with what we got. And although there are some elements that I think could have been improved on, it's still a good movie. Hugh Jackman carries this movie pretty well with his performance as Wolverine. He does a really great job, and the action is very clear, and it's always fun to watch, and the violence, when we do get violence, feels real, and I really enjoyed the tone, especially in the first half of the movie. And overall, it was a good movie that I enjoyed watching. So check this movie out if you haven't already, and with all that being said, I'm going to give The Wolverine a 6 out of 10. Thank you for watching my videos as always. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to leave a like and comment down below you thought of The Wolverine, and my social media links, they will all be in the description, so follow me there. And last but not least, subscribe to be a part of Foley Nation, and I'll see when I get my next review up, and that is going to be for the third movie in a row that's going to start with the letter W. Whiplash. So look forward to that. But until I get that up, thank you for watching and have a great day.